were the ancient peoples of the world? And what did they know? Egyptology tells us that the pyramids were built around 2500 BC. Is there evidence that the pyramids could be much, much older? Has traditional science been able to explain why the pyramids were built? Or is it a puzzle yet to be decoded? At the geodesic center of the world, at the mouth of the Nile Delta, there are pyramids built by an early civilization clustering at 6 distinct sites. One pyramid is up a mountain. It can be seen from space. Curiously, the inside is open to the air. What was its function? Most people are familiar with the Giza Plateau and the Sphinx, but are not aware of their connection to the other sites. The sites run parallel to the fertile band along the Nile. Some sites are unknown, isolated in the middle of the desert. Other sites are known, but are only partially excavated. The monumental nature of the sites is hypnotic and stimulates our wonder and curiosity. All the sites show evidence of sophisticated engineering, advanced technology, and monumental architecture. Could the ancients have had an understanding of a superior science? Is it conceivable that there's a correlation between the sky and the ground? Why do we understand so little about the Egyptians? We are told their technology was primitive. Yet the temple walls show the ancients making precise calculations. There is plenty of evidence that paints a fuller picture. Let's go and see for ourselves.
So here we are on location at Abu Raush, which is a fascinating site in that it's up a mountain.
This is a pyramid like no other, open to the air.
This site really debunks the theory of pulling stones with rope to get them up on top of a pyramid, in that the stone would have to come up a mountain before it went up a pyramid. This site is largely isolated and abandoned, and many people don't even know it's here. There's no booth, there's no guard, there's nobody up here. And I think it's meant to be largely forgotten because it really comes head to head with the theory about the way the pyramids were built. When you look around the site, you see evidence of small stones that are newer, medium stones, and then the ancient large stones.
At Abu Raush, we can see evidence of machine tool marks. We know the granite came from distant quarries. The polished, concave slabs of stone could not possibly have been made with chisels. This is not the only example of machine tooling.
We're now going to go inside the pyramid. We're walking along this ledge. And what we'll see is there's a passageway here that goes down into the pyramid, even though it's open and exposed. So let's go down. If you stand here, all the way through this area, the stone seems to be blackened, and it's evidence of high heat of some kind. I tend to think this was going on during the ancient times, but it's still very curious. There's a pit here, and the stone's obviously broken, and I think that they were heating something. This is the northern point of the Band of Peace. It's the top pyramid in a series of 22 pyramids that go from north to south. So we're now north of the Giza Plateau.
As you can see on this map of the Band of Peace, all these sites trace the shape of the River Nile. A new theory suggests that the Nile once flowed right in front of the pyramids, and the causeways of all the sites touched the river itself. Considering that the Nile is the lifeblood of Egypt, just as rivers all around the world are vital to the cultures living by them, it seems obvious that important sacred structures would be built directly on the river, not 8 miles away from it. How long would it take this river to migrate 8 miles? Looking at geological time provides yet another clue to finding out when these magnificent structures may have been built.
This probably was a seabed, and that the mouth of the Nile started here and that moved along in front of all these pyramids. One of the features of each of the sites in this area is that you can see the pyramids of the next site from the original.
From here, the volume of the Great Pyramid and the Second Pyramid look the same. When we get to the next site, we see the volumes are obviously different. It's hard not to be amazed by the pyramids of the Giza Plateau. The Great Pyramid covers 13 acres. It was constructed of 2.3 million stones weighing up to 200 tons each.
must have had a level of engineering science that it was unbelievable compared to what we have now.
Indeed, they managed to have an order of which they based on this so-called cosmic order, which lasted for 3,000 years. No other civilization has done this.
Why is ancient Egypt still so mysterious to us? Are we looking in the wrong place? Or are we looking in the wrong way?
We look at everything through our sociocultural context, and so it's very difficult for us to look through that and see another possibility for how life could have been. And we also have to be willing to depart from our own traditional ways of looking at things. That's what's really stopping us from understanding the ancients.
We may know and what we think we've seen. For example, instead of thinking that the Egyptians put the causeway at an angle because the Sphinx was in the way, we could consider another reason. At summer solstice, the sun rises along the causeway in front of the Great Pyramid and moves across the sky, setting between the second and the Great Pyramid, making it hotter in summer. In the winter, the sun rises in line with the Grand Causeway by the Second Pyramid and sets between the second and third pyramids, making a short trajectory, resulting in cooler weather. It appears that the causeways are deliberately pointing towards the rising sun on the summer and winter solstices. Orthodox Egyptologists insist that the pyramids were tombs.
Of all of the wild theories floating around the pyramids, the actual wildest is the one that's accepted without question by all Egyptologists, which is that the pyramids served as tombs.
All of those concepts about it being a tomb are nonsense.
Of all of the theories for which there's zero evidence, that one has zero squared evidence.
In fact, I don't even think there's good evidence that it ever was a tomb for any pharaoh whatsoever.
I mean, it's obvious we don't find mummies in the pyramids.
There's no question you can bring up that isn't debatable. The Egyptians themselves, in at least one stone tablet and one papyrus, tell the story that ancient Egypt is much, much older than the Egyptologists think it is.
Where the Great Pyramid sits, I believe, is on a much more ancient site. Under the Great Pyramid to this day is the descending passage in the subterranean chamber. I think there's very good evidence that that was carved out in what we would call pre-dynastic times. That goes back to a very ancient date. Based on the hieroglyphics that we have, the second pyramid was in many ways regarded as the primary pyramid on the Giza Plateau. Actually, from many angles on the Giza Plateau, the second pyramid is dominant. The structure underneath it, or the base of it, was older than even the Great Pyramid. There was a platform type structure where the second pyramid is now.
You can see from the platform that it's larger than the pyramid, suggesting there was once something else there.
Around the base is a ring of granite, red granite, and at least from what I've seen in Egypt, this is something that was often used around the bases or on structures when they were renewing them, they were refurbishing them, they were taking older structures, re-energizing them, rebuilding them.
It's demonstrable in that the second pyramid is very definitely built in at least 2 stages, the third built in 2 or more stages. I mean, we really don't at the moment have anything to even provisionally to date them with. With the Sphinx we do.
Looking at the weathering on the Sphinx and the Sphinx enclosure, that weathering was clearly formed by runoff from rain, from precipitation.
We have the severe weathering, which 99% of the geologists of the world who've heard our evidence concur that it is indeed water weathering and precipitation induced. So it has to have been done by heavy rainfalls in the distant past, and the question then is, how distant was that past?
That runoff is coming from up on the plateau. Follow up the plateau northwest of the Sphinx, you ultimately hit the Great Pyramid. The natural topography is the water would run down the back of the Sphinx enclosure, and that's where you see the greatest amount of water precipitation weathering. To have that surface hydrology, you need to have the plateau relatively intact. Now, if you look, currently there's a big quarry interrupting the water flow. So we know that the water flow that was causing that weathering had to occur before that quarry existed. That quarry is well known Egyptologically by inscriptions, etc. That was a quarry that was used when the Great Pyramid was built. So that means that the Sphinx must have been carved earlier. The water was still running off, running down the back of the enclosure wall and causing that weathering before that quarry was a quarry, which means that occurs before the Great Pyramid was built. Basically, we have right there disrupted the traditional chronology.
Even Egyptologists agree that the Giza Plateau has a unified ground plan. How does the Great Pyramid display evidence of this correlation?
I do think when it was what we would call partially built, it was used as an astronomical observatory. The Grand Gallery, perfectly aligned north-south, opening to the southern sky, would have made a wonderful observational tube, essentially, looking up into the sky.
We have shafts pointing to certain stars, Orion's Belt, Sirius. We know the stars because they're mentioned in the text. We therefore can use precession astronomy to place the stars back in alignment with these monuments, in this case the pyramids, for example.
The Great Pyramid stands exactly at the center of the largest land mass on the planet. Yet, we had no idea of the position of continents until 600 years ago. How could they have known?
I've shown that Giza, if interpreted as being Orion's belt counterpart, then the layout of the three pyramids, as they are to the ground meridian, would fit a celestial meridian of these stars at 10,500 BC. They reach the very lowest point in their up and down move. Looking east, you had the Sphinx looking at the constellation of Leo. So you have two major monuments on the same site, looking at constellations that are representative of these features on the ground in the sky. We have evidence that they did it, and the alignments were there. Now, could the pyramid builders have been aware of these alignments? Or why not?
With this evidence, it would seem that it's time to rethink what we've been told.
Here we are at Abu Ghraib. You can see that there's no road, no ticket booth, no nothing. This is a very isolated area. And we're going to walk through a mango grove. If you were to get on a camel and ride south from Giza Plateau, you'd come up over the sand dune and see these other pyramids. So as we approach up here, you see a pile of rubble, but really what it is the base of the largest obelisk that ever was in Egypt. Well, here we come up to the platform of the crystal altar. You can see that it's made of quartz, if you look up close here. These little bits of crystal are coming right off it. And then we have a laser cut 6-foot circle in the middle. And then these points, these huge slabs, these pointing to the 4 cardinal directions, made out of single solid pieces of quartz. So here we have some stone basins that were found by Sir Walter Emery years and years ago, and the Department of Antiquities lined all these up with the idea of maybe bringing them to the museum, and they really didn't know what to call them or what they were, so they just decided to leave them here, and they've been here ever since. But if you look at the features on these, they're actually made out of quartz crystal. We'll look up close at some of the places, but when there's little fragments that break off, it's actually a hunk of quartz. And there are these little holes inside, and they say that they were for animal sacrifices and the blood would drip through. I don't know. I really don't think that's what happened. No one has ever come up with a theory that satisfies me about what they're for.
Is there anyone who knows more about this area? Hakim Awiyan.
Sometime because it's narrow.
At Abu Jarab, we have a crystal altar, a round disc in the middle of 4, a symbol of Hotep. And the word Hotep means peace and food. This round disc, it's a lid on a shaft about 180 feet deep to the level of the ocean. And that is still running water in there, and you can feel it while you're in the area.
These instruments were not found in a line like you see today, it's 9 of them, but they found around the area. And there is still some more to be found.
And then we have oldest obelisk located in Egypt. Next to that altar, what's left of the what you call hieroglyph writing, that is Sufi writing. It has the obelisk and the disk of the sun and words saying the heart of the sun. Ibra.
Arriving at Abu Sir, we can imagine the ancient priests and priestesses who trained as high-level initiates here. Just as we have monks, nuns, and priests nowadays, the ancients trained initiates in ritual practices that served the highest good of mankind.
Here we are at Abu Sir, and it's very obvious. You can see the old riverbed. You can see the pyramids of Saqqara and the pyramids of Giza from here. But more importantly, you can see the old causeway, and you can imagine that boats used to come along the river, and then the high-level initiates would just step off the boat and walk up the grand causeway and through the pillars into the temple, which is in front of the main pyramid.
Spiritual connections would nourish the initiates, instilling a sense of peace and purpose. These elegant columns are carved from solid granite.
There's something about these black floors that you just imagine them being polished, and the beauty in here.
Here we are at Saqqara. This is the famous step pyramid of Djoser. Djoser is a title to the king of the third dynasty, 2900 BC, roughly, said the books. The step pyramid is located in a big courtyard, much older than the pyramid itself. And you can compare yourself with the same eye. You look at the pyramid and you look at the wall, you can see the difference.
These chunks of stone in front of Hakim are quartz crystal characteristic of the area.
If we go back to the ceiling here, then it reflects the crystal tile on the ground. This is what's left of it. This has been quarried by the natives in the area in the 17th century.
We see the remains of a quartz floor at Giza, in the temple to the east of the second pyramid.
Now I'm pointing the jade pillar, which is symbolizing one of the ancient gods, Osiris. And jade is a word we still use to address the older people, like grandmother and grandfather, jade. That goes back to the story of Osiris and his brother Seth, the bad guy, who put Osiris in a coffin, throw him in the ocean. The ocean took him place Phoenicia, Lebanon today, and there is the cedar tree grows, and the roots of the cedar tree captured this coffin till it has been found by his beloved sister Isis. She cried, her tears touch his body, and they live together again for a short while, short enough to make a baby with the name of Horus.
The story of Isis, Osiris, and Horus is fundamental to Egyptian cosmology. Isis is connected to the star Sirius, and Osiris is connected to the constellation of Orion. Horus is their prodigal son.
I'm going to take you now to see that hospital, the healing with the sound.
Stories about ancient healing techniques were passed down from generation to generation by the elders. Hakim explains how sound played a part in diagnosing and healing patients.
That line of construction you see like 3 chambers, it's what's left of the house of the spirit. And it's a healing system with a sound. It's a medical investigation table. And the patient have the right to use either side of the stairs. One on the right, one on the left. So he have to follow, or she have to follow her own antenna to climb up there and choose the point where she stands. Because each point is connected to a check chamber. We have 22 of them, 11 on each side, no ceiling. And when you go inside, you can see a niche where the physician put his head in the niche to see what's the matter with his patient laying on this table. And that works with the sound. And the sound source is running water in a tunnel underneath here. So it's a big map of tunnels underneath here.
Let's consider that the pyramid sites along the Band of Peace are sophisticated harmonic structures, not only mirroring positions of the stars, but designed to replicate harmonic cavities of the human body. It seems that the chambers in the pyramids are harmonically tuned to a specific frequency or musical tone. Sound healing techniques were used to restore the patient's body to the correct harmonic within. This is the view of Abu Sir to the north of Saqqara, and here is the view of Dashur to the south.
Here we are on location at the Bent Pyramid. What you'll notice here is that the construction has two angles.
Traditional Egyptologists will tell you that the Egyptians were practicing building pyramids, and they started building at one angle, then changed their minds partway through. This is the kind of thinking that paints the ancient Egyptians as infantile and misguided. But is there another way of looking at it?
We call these constructions at that area in Dashur related to king called Senefru.
At Dashur, there are 3 pyramids with 3 burial chambers in each, 9 in total. Traditional Egyptology tells us that the entire site was built by Sneferu. If the established story that the pyramids are tombs is correct, why would Sneferu have needed so many?
Sneferu would have had 9 different possibilities and options for where he would have been buried, which again is illogical. So this comes back to the fact that understanding the Egyptians in terms of traditional Egyptology means that they were misguided and illogical. I don't think this was the case.
Now, when you come to the word Senefru, sin means double. Nefer is harmony, so it's double harmony. It's not a name of a person, but it's the energy we get from these constructions.
Let's consider that the pyramid sites along the Band of Peace are sophisticated harmonic structures. It seems that the chambers in the pyramids were harmonically tuned to different frequencies or musical tones.
The Bent Pyramid, it has 2 chambers for 2 different sounds.
Each chamber in each pyramid, then, could be exemplifying sound technology with distinct tones, creating huge fields of harmonic resonance. At Dashur, we have the Red Pyramid and the Black Pyramid. The Bent Pyramid is covered in white Tura limestone. So we have red, white, and black. Maybe this is a clue to the Giza pyramids also having distinct colors in the past. It would seem that the Great Pyramid would have been shimmering white with its casing stones. The second pyramid still glimmers red. And the third pyramid has the remnants of black stones. This is the old riverbed where the Nile flowed in times past. Here is the Black Pyramid. Egyptologists say the pyramid builders were experimenting and they miscalculated, so the pyramid broke apart. Could there be a different explanation? Another pyramid with similar construction 100 kilometers south of the Band of Peace is known as the Maidum Pyramid.
Today when you walk around Maidum Pyramid, you'll find out that on the ground is a coat of black color flint. And the evidence is this. When you pick up one of these flints, you see it's black at the top and the bottom is a different color. And there is a catastrophe happening over there. I want you to look at the ground. You can see a coat of smoke affect the flints on the ground.
Maidum is not the only place that looks as though there was an explosion. Look at this giant crack in the solid stone of the Red Pyramid. It would have taken a huge force to crack the solid rock. There is a crack in the subterranean chamber in the Great Pyramid. And there is another one in the Grand Gallery. There are weird chemical burns in the Red Pyramid. What could have caused these? Old photos of the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid show the stone as black. The room was cleaned and restored, and now we can see the walls are pink granite. The granite sarcophagus has a broken corner, and the wall next to it has a giant crack. What kind of force could have caused this? Is the Department of Antiquities erasing evidence under the guise of restoration? Where did we get the history of Egypt? Herodotus was a Greek historian in the 5th century BC. He wrote from his perspective with help from local people, and we have been repeating it ever since.
It's a fake story. I want you to know yourself, to wake up, to wake the senses and look carefully what you are looking at. What have you seen of the pyramid today? That's what's left of it. Being abused. People quarry stones from there. Anybody can go and pick up stones and to build a church, mosque, house, palace. It's not taken good care of by our Minister of Culture and Antiquities Department. I have to say this.
The story leaves many questions unanswered. Maybe it is time we use the evidence to reconsider what we've been told. We need to look with fresh eyes and use a different time frame to reconstruct the story of ancient Egypt. We are accustomed to our own technology, and find it difficult to recognize that the ancients may have had sophisticated technology of their own. Since the technology of the ancients is not obvious to us, are we looking in the wrong place? Could it be they had power systems, but they were entirely different from ours today? Looking at the architecture of structures from ancient Egypt stimulates a sense of wonder. Clearly, Egyptian monuments rival the grandeur of our most modern buildings today. Yet we are taught to believe that we are the ones with knowledge of high technology, something the ancients could not possibly have had.
As long as we think that the ancients weren't able to use high technology, then we're not looking for it. And yet, the evidence is right in front of our eyes.
We find megalithic sites everywhere around the world. There are certain things in common that they all seem to know, and we don't know it.
A lot of people are trying to figure out why mankind built these structures out of these huge megalithic stones. We don't even know how to move 200, 300-ton stones very well today, let alone 4,000 or 5,000 years ago.
I started looking at megalithic structures from an electromagnetic point of view, and sure enough, I began to find that there were these energies there present in measurable forces.
Strange things happen sometimes in sacred sites, and those are clues that the physics that we're taught in school is not everything.
For thousands of years, the pyramids and the Sphinx stood as sentinels on the open desert. Yet, in recent years, a 20-mile wall, 14 feet high, was installed around the enormous site of the Giza Plateau. There are about 100 armed guards patrolling the pyramids at night. Applications for investigative academic research, while entertained initially, are almost all routinely refused. Unlike in times past, tourists are now being restricted from taking photographs in the Egyptian Museum. The monuments of Egypt are World Heritage Sites. Why is access and legitimate scientific research being systematically restricted? Much of ancient Egypt remains undiscovered. Satellite images show traces of buried structures that are still not excavated. In the name of protecting sites, are Egyptian authorities preventing us from learning the truth about our ancient past? Despite strict regulations on what kind of research is allowed, there is still an extraordinary amount of evidence that shows that the ancient Egyptians had knowledge that has been lost.
We don't have the technology to build the pyramids now. Not even close. We're not the most evolved we've ever been. And that is one of the blinders that has stopped us from imagining that the ancients could have been far smarter than us.
Hakim Awian was raised by indigenous elders who lived in the area of the Band of Peace. Having preserved the ancient Suf language, stories were passed down generation after generation. Fragments of knowledge from the ancient past were thus preserved.
If my colleague, the scholar, who learned to say that the Egyptians have a piece of rope put around a block of stone, at least 60-ton weight, and pull and push by animals and run on wooden blocks. This is what the scholars are saying.
We may never be exactly sure how the pyramids were built, yet we can begin to reconstruct our understanding of the culture living in the Golden Age and their values. Traditional Egyptology insists that the pyramids were built by slaves to feed the egos of kings. Does this fit with our emerging construct of Egypt in a golden age?
There is no slavery. All workers are willingly pyramids builder. This is a qualified people of architecture, engineers, and they deal with all the power by cutting stones, transfer it and use it. And that is clear not only in the pyramids and in the temple walls and many places. You can see that clearly.
There are clues throughout Egypt that point to knowledge of high technology. A fascinating thing occurred when a chunk of stone recently fell off a lintel at Abydos Temple, and controversial images resembling a helicopter and other advanced-looking vehicles were revealed under the stone. It would seem that the images were covered in the distant past when things were changing politically in Egypt. Nowadays, Egyptian tour guides are explicitly instructed not to point these out to tourists. The Egyptological explanation is that it is multiple hieroglyphs overlapping from distant kings' inscriptions. But, like many things in Egypt, the explanation is still debatable. Another controversial object that Egyptologists merely deem impossible is the artifact commonly known as the Baghdad Battery, that generates a mild electrical charge. Similar ancient artifacts that match these objects have been found in Egypt. We can't say for certain, but it would appear that the Egyptians documented the existence of these artifacts as well. Recreations of these objects have been made and have successfully created electric current. Also noteworthy are strange representations of objects that resemble light bulbs, found in the crypts at Dendera. There was no natural light inside these underground crypts, but we see no soot from torches or oil lamps, the only lights we know the ancients used. Could the ancient Egyptians have had their own source of electrical power? If nothing else, the ancients had to cut, move, and lift massive stone blocks that would challenge our engineers today. What was their secret? We automatically assume that ancient structures are for ceremonial and religious purposes. Maybe the pyramids served a completely different function than previously imagined.
There's been lots of speculation about what the pyramids were actually built for. The most accepted notion is that they were tombs.
Much more complicated situation with the Great Pyramid than most people understand or most people believe, including a lot of Egyptologists who see it simply as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu.
That idea is childish for the following reason. I mean, it's obvious we don't find mummies in the pyramids.
And of course, not finding a single mummy in any of the pyramids doesn't seem to deter the people who think that that's what they were for.
Yes, there's something that's sometimes referred to as a stone sarcophagus or coffer in it, a beautiful granite structure, but that doesn't prove definitively in my mind that it was ever actually used for a tomb. It may have been used for many other purposes.
Pyramids were built not as a tomb. There are some pyramids built in a different construction, like the one in Saqqara State Pyramid, that is tomb.
Look at the obvious difference in construction between the Step Pyramid and the Great Pyramid. The difference in style of construction would logically indicate they were built in different time frames. The buildings we know to be tombs, like the Step Pyramid at Saqqara and the flat-topped mastabas also at Saqqara, are very different from the smooth-sided pyramids at Giza and Dashur. Typically in Egypt, older constructions are built of larger stones. New constructions are built of smaller stones. Also, in archaeology, older structures are deeper. Newer structures are found closer to the surface. Every other tomb that has been found is highly decorated with names of the occupant. The inside of these pyramids seems solely functional and not decorative at all.
But if we stop altogether and say, okay, if they weren't tombs, what were they?
What are the biggest structures that modern man builds on the planet? The biggest, most awe-inspiring structures we create are hydroelectric dams. Why are we willing to invest such awe-inspiring amounts of labor and effort in constructing those? Because we know we're going to get a very valuable physical return in the form of electricity. And by comparison, I wonder if the ancient megalith builders weren't willing to invest such staggering amounts of resources by even smaller populations because they knew that they could get something very physical and worthwhile back from it.
People are fascinated by Egyptian monuments, and some report the energy is palpable at these sites. Is it possible to confirm this energy through scientific means?
What I've been finding in the last 20 years of research, a lot of experiments have been done that show that there's a certain type of energy that does not exist in our current science. It's unknown in our current science. We call it subtle energy.
Well, this is a whole new trend of thought in looking at ancient structures, that maybe the ancients understood subtle energies.
So this appears to be a technology that may have existed in megalithic societies. You know, these societies that built things out of big stones.
It makes sense that you could motivate an entire population to invest so heavily in building these structures, I think. And I don't mean to say by any means that this is the only purpose of the megaliths, but I think it's pretty clear that it's at least one of the primary or one of the important purposes for building these structures.
We find megalithic sites everywhere around the world, and there's a tendency to make circles or certain types of formations.
Megalithic sites occur all over the world. Is their placement random? Or does the location of these sites reveal yet another hidden layer of ancient knowledge?
One thing I've found looking at different megalithic structures over a few continents and numerous places around the world, overwhelmingly these places, the pyramids, the Stonehenges, etc. of the world, were placed on ground where an unusual type of geology naturally concentrates the regular daily natural electromagnetic fluctuations that occur everywhere on the earth each day.
If you go into England, for example, the ley lines that cross England, the Michael line, which is hundreds of miles long, that crosses England, that carries this energy along that line.
It will therefore generate electric currents in the land called telluric currents in the straight geological sense of that word. And those occur everywhere on the planet.
We know that this delay energy, this subtle energy, passes along these lines.
There are certain special types of geology that will magnify those several-fold. And that's where we found the megalith builders preferred to put their monuments.
And typically where lines cross, where you get more than one line intersecting, temples were often built.
These are called conductivity discontinuities, which sounds highly technical, but it's merely the place where one area of ground that has a good ability to conduct electricity meets another area of ground that has a lesser ability to conduct these natural electric currents.
The Chinese had the same tradition. They called them dragon lines. It was illegal for a commoner to be buried on such a line. A king had to be buried on such a line. They put palaces there. There's a whole series of sacred sites. They're always built on lines like this.
I want to say in this area about the location of temple. And you have to have the symbols appear on the ground. When it's seen, then this is the place where people naturally come to get more healthy energy from that spot. You know, energy pops from the earth.
And it appears as though they were attempting to control the flow of this energy and use it for their own purposes.
The key hours, unfortunately, are the pre-dawn hours. If you really want to study this, you've got to get up at 3 and get out there very fast. That's because the energy that is involved in these sites, that's really fueling most of it, originates with the daily changes in the Earth's geomagnetic field. It's strongest during the day, weakest at night. And in the hours leading up to dawn, the weaker field lines now come roaring back to closer to full strength very quick. It's the most dramatic time in terms of change of magnetic strength per hour. It's the most dramatic time of the day. And wherever you have a changing magnetic field occurring, you are generating electric current in anything present that will conduct electricity. It's a simple principle of physics known as induction, and it's a universal.
Normally, in everyday life, we don't ever see large concentrations of this energy. Normally, it'll show up at, let's say, at mountaintops, at sacred sites. You'll feel a certain calm, a certain peace. Sometimes people in those places report mystical experiences. They'll see into some other dimension. Okay, they'll see into some other time. The Chinese have known about this for a long time, and they call it qi. The Hindus, in their ancient texts, call it prana, and the yogis, that maintain a very ancient tradition, use it. It affects a variety of different processes. Electricity, magnetism has a strong effect on that, so it modifies all the other laws of physics. When you look back on how sacred sites were chosen and buildings like the pyramids were constructed, the suspicion arises that they understood quite a bit more about this stuff than we do, and they may have been using it in their engineering.
Then the megalith builders designed these structures and then built them in such a way as to further concentrate those energies. So they definitely seem to have known what they were doing.
We are not used to things built out of stone being high technology. It is clear that several different kinds of stone from a variety of sources were used to construct Egyptian monuments. Did the distinct qualities of the stones serve a special purpose?
What I do find fascinating is that the core of the pyramids, at least at Giza, are made out of one type of limestone. Now, it is the limestone that was closest, but it also happens to be the type that's called dolomite because it's got a high magnesium content. And because of that metal content, that kind of limestone conducts electricity pretty well. And then they chose to sheath the pyramid in the whiter Tura limestone, which, granted, it's whiter and it's prettier and all that, but it also has almost zero magnesium content. And therefore it's a much poorer conductor of electricity. It's closer to a pure calcium carbonate, which is what all limestone is. And pure calcium carbonate conducts electricity much more poorly than dolomite does. It's interesting to me that there's outer stones were the ones that they cut so precisely that all these thousands of years later you still can't get a razor blade between them. Because basically what we've got here is we've got a situation with a highly electrically conductive core of those pyramids wrapped in what is effectively a very effective insulator. Why the granite in the passageways, you know? And so, of course, I'm thinking from an electrical point of view and a physical point of view. Is there anything special about granite? And yeah, there is. Granite is slightly radioactive, and it will ionize or electrify the air. It releases radon gas, which is radioactive.
Granite is a transmission stone. It's not dead stone. It's alive.
So you have these sealed shafts with granite linings, and I wonder if it wasn't designed to keep an electrical charge present in those shafts. They were built exactly like, if you will, an insulated wire, only more so because you've got all the charge in the ground that's spread across the base, concentrated all the way up into this tiny spot at the top.
We find similarities in three different constructions. The one at Giza here, Valley Temple, and one at Abydos, and another one abroad in England, the Stonehenge. The same material being constructed with, and same way and same technique. But the construction there, it's built in addition to have the water, because it's water bed. It's a huge water bed, and it's still working, still producing water.
In Egypt, you do have a similar situation to England in that you have limestone aquifers under the monuments.
An aquifer is an underground layer of porous, water-bearing rock. Water flows through the aquifers as rainfall, or when rivers and lakes flood, the water drains into them.
And movement of water through limestone or chalk aquifers is known to produce electrical charge by two different processes that are self-reinforcing. And I've personally measured this for a week at a stretch at Silbury Hill in England, for example. Before and after thunderstorms, as the water is sinking into the ground, we measured the increase in ground current, the change in the magnetic field as that happened, etc. And in Egypt, you had the Nile crashing, dropping every year and then flooding again. And that movement of water up and down through the layers of limestone would generate electrical charge. Flowing water generates at least a mild electrical charge, which means it generates an electric current, which means it generates a magnetic field as well. So if you were looking to give an electrical charge, a little boost to, say, a mound or something like that, it makes a lot of sense to have it at a minimum running water. And in fact, at Tiwanaku on the south shore of Lake Titicaca, their biggest monument, the Akapana Pyramid, was terraced in such a way as to have the water come down in waterfalls that alternated outside the pyramid, inside the pyramid. But that kind of falling water generates enough electric charge that one of the common school physics experiments is you can, in your own sink at home, if you could divide the stream of water coming out of your faucet into two separate streams, you can take a little LED indicator light and put it between the streams, and it'll generate enough electricity that maybe every 20 seconds or so the light bulb will come on. And then the question is, did some of those layers of limestone run up the Giza plateau? And they did, and they did, come up to the surface underneath where some of the pyramids are located. The idea would be that it would be the rising and falling of the Nile that would produce this electric ground current by moving through the different layers of the limestone aquifer. And when there was a dip, say, in that supply, maybe that's when the ionized air in the granite shafts and galleries could help keep the process going, if you will. I tend to wonder if the electrified shafts might not have been able to act in a similar fashion to your car battery when you come to a stoplight. Normally, your battery is not being used when you're driving your car. The alternator provides all the juice. But when you stop and that alternator is turning very weakly, that's when you want the battery there to keep everything going so your engine doesn't cut out. So you've got this concentration of negative charge from the ground at the peak of the pyramid or mound, and a concentration of positive charge above it. And if those two become strong enough, you can start to get brush discharge, which would mean it would glow, like ball lightning, for example. It's a theory.
Why in the Great Pyramid is there no frescoes, there's nothing, no decorations at all? Now, some people have proposed the idea that the pyramids are actually energy machines. And so I liken this to the fact, like, you wouldn't put a decoration inside your oven.
I was talking with a woman who had spent some time in the Great Pyramid, and her comment was, it felt like I was in a machine. She said it was not like this, oh, it's a wonderful shrine. She said it felt very functional. In fact, she made a comment that I actually think is probably right on. She said, I felt as if I wouldn't have wanted to be in here when it was running.
Invisible, subtle energy occurs around us all the time and is measurable by science.
We had noticed a lot of people showing us photographs from megalithic sites that disproportionately often seem to have these balls of light in there, usually flash photos.
Orbs are often written off as dust or other particles in the air, but that does not change the fact that they seem to occur more often in particular places at particular times.
At Tikal, at the top of the most energetic pyramid that we found down there, we took a lot of flash photos during the course of our 8-hour stakeouts, which would run from roughly 3 a.m. till 11 a.m. And on the pyramids that were electrically dead, that had no juice, nothing going on, which were the big fancy ones, but the most recently built ones, we would take photos and find out eventually when they were developed, no orbs, no glowing balls of light. But on the oldest pyramid down there, where we did work and got all kinds of results, that was 1,200 years older than the big fancier ones. In that case, the photography we got back from our own simple flash cameras, they were literally choking the screen with these balls at the period at which the air had its highest in electrical charge. And on the strongest day down there, I was recording electrical charge higher than I've recorded even in thunderstorms back home. We don't know what orbs are, but our personal guess is that they're balls of ionized or electrified air that will tend to hang together. A good analogy would be ball lightning, where it's simply so electrified that the molecules are excited enough to glow.
Other evidence shows that there is energy occurring naturally everywhere on the planet that our science knows about but seems to ignore. Nikola Tesla sought to provide the world with free wireless electricity for everybody on Earth. He discovered that electricity occurred naturally throughout the Earth's atmosphere and ground. The telluric currents in the ground that John Burke discussed, and the electricity present in the ionosphere in the atmosphere, which is ionized by the sun, he also created and developed ways to harness those energies.
Tesla, who teach Nikola Tesla to get to that power of electricity. And he didn't invent it, it's already there, but he know how to use it. And not only that, he did not take an advantage like Mr. Edison.
Tesla wanted to harness the natural energy that exists everywhere on Earth and make it free to the public. Edison endeavored to produce and distribute electricity by creating a regulated monopoly for profit.
He became rich and the people more light into their home. Yeah, so Nikola Tesla, he's the one think of how to use this energy.
Between 1901 and 1917, the Tesla Tower was built on Long Island as a wireless broadcasting system for telephone and electrical signals. Interestingly, it was constructed on an aquifer with descending passageways and tunnels beneath it. At the time, few understood how it worked. Tesla's funding was ultimately dropped by J.P. Morgan because Tesla wanted the wireless electricity to be free, and therefore J.P. Morgan couldn't make a profit. So even though Tesla's genius was seen by many, he was still driven into obscurity. The energy to create free wireless energy has always existed on our planet, and still exists today.
And it's not the only energy on our planet, there are plenty. The rivers are flow by energy, tsunami is energy, frequencies are energy. If we have the electricity now, it's based on explosion energy. Now, the sound energy based on a technology different from the explosion energy, and it's known as implosion energy.
This energy was not the kind of energy that we have that pollutes. It was a completely passive energy that had no byproducts.
The energy we use today is generated by combustion and is non-renewable. It is called explosion energy and leaves exhaust and pollution.
Our system all over the planet today is based on the explosion energy. That's why the petrol is too expensive.
In contrast, implosion energy, like solar panels and wind power, is clean and renewable. We are beginning to realize that we need sustainable energy.
The implosion energy, very simple. All what you need is the beam of the sun on a running water. Not just running in a straight line, but in a zigzag. And that's, you find all the tunnels are in a zigzag form for such a purpose.
In addition to the limestone aquifers underneath the pyramids, there is evidence of a network of man-made tunnels.
As a boy, when I'm living in my house, which is a few 100 yards away from the nose of what we call the Sphinx Tefnuti, this was my playing yard, and I know tunnels. I walked in these tunnels, I swim in these tunnels, I crawled in these tunnels, and I know that this is one way of creating energy. Now this is cost nothing. I mean, all what you need is a beam of the sun reaching the running water underneath the tunnel, and you can see that there are many openings in each tunnel permit this sun beam reach the water. And when it does, then the energy is there. Energy is not just to run your car, or it's run the people, feed the people.
If the pyramid fields of the Band of Peace and the network of underground tunnels are still there, why don't they generate energy the way they used to?
In the condition of the pyramids now, stripped of those smooth insulating outer casings, it's going to leak electrical air about as well as a car radiator radiates heat. I mean, it's almost perfectly designed to weaken that, and yet still you get these reports of people like Siemens, who was one of the pioneers of electricity, and he was an Englishman. There's even a unit of electrical, I believe, resistance named after him called the Siemens. He was on top of the Great Pyramid, I think, during the 1880s, and they began to notice that when his Arab guides stood up and spread his fingers, they'd hear a ringing. And when he closed them, you wouldn't. And he stood up, and he could sense the literal electricity in the air. And on the spot, he improvised an instant Leyden jar, which is one of the earliest things they used to use to store electric charge. And he did it by opening a wine bottle, wetting some newspaper, wrapping the wet newspaper around the glass wine bottle, and holding the wine bottle up above his head until sparks started to issue from the wine bottle. And at that point, his Arab guides started accusing him of things like witchcraft. They got into a physical struggle, and he accidentally touched one of the guides with the charged wine bottle, and it knocked the man to the ground and unconscious for a short period, after which they took off down the pyramid. But there was, in other words, a professional scientist familiar with electricity in its rudimentary but accurate forms, sensing exactly that, even in this ruined condition that the pyramid's in today. Yeah.
If you come to the Egyptian Museum, there is an item over there known as the schist disc, found by Dr. Walter Emery, and he said, or he thinks that it could be a vase for a lotus flower. No.
The schist disc was found at Saqqara in a burial chamber that no one is allowed to visit. Other goods found in the chamber were simple ropes, pottery, and grains. The disc shows clear evidence of sophisticated technology in the way it was built, and it seems out of context with the rest of the grave goods. Is this the original context for this artifact? Or is it possible that it has had a long journey over the last several millennia, and this just happened to be its final resting place? Look at this hollow stone tube. It looks as though the schist disc could fit over it. It would take sophisticated instruments to shape the tube so precisely. How did they do it?
To cut the stone. This is by a sonic cut with no metal instruments like bronze chisel or this. No, it's another stone. And this other stone, it's the hardest stone you can find, which is the diamond.
There are pieces of stone lying around that show concave shapes that actually have the machine tooling marks on it. The evidence of the high technology is right in front of us.
Look again at these quartz objects. Aside from their unique and amazing shapes, could they have had another purpose? Today, quartz crystal is used as the basis of all kinds of modern technology. It is most commonly used in crystal oscillators. Technology uses oscillating frequencies from tiny quartz crystals that vibrate at certain speeds, with a signature vibration for each device. AM/FM radios, CDs and DVDs, computer processors and Ethernet rely on quartz crystals. Could it be that the ancients were tapping into this technology and using it on a much larger scale, in a way we can only begin to imagine? Of course, we can't say for certain, but based on what we've seen, we can theorize. Energy can be created and manipulated in many ways. It is the lifeblood of a civilization, and therefore an important resource.
In Egypt, there are 67 constructions all along the Nile like sails. And for those who has the eye, they can tell from the shape of that construction. The straight form of angles, that is a pyramid or a construction for energy, a plant
for energy. That's what we have.
A theory that's always struck me, that they were intended actually to somehow or another spiritualize a whole civilization. In other words, to provide a widespread, high level of energy that people needed because a descending age was upon them.
And I believe what the pyramid and other certain other structures were constructed for was to basically act as a kind of the equivalent of a street light. You know, if you're in a neighborhood that's maybe not the nicest neighborhood, and it gets dark at night, you like to have bright lights go on. And that's effectively what the Great Pyramid was. Now, these were not lights that illuminated it so that people could see where they were going. It was basically a device, a generator for, if you will, broadcasting and transmitting throughout the planetary structure a type of field which uplifted the entire humanity.
And maybe those pyramids were built in some sense or another to stay the decline. Let's call them in some sense or another spiritual granaries designed to somehow store an emotional or spiritual or psychological or some sort of energy that was needed to keep people from becoming the total barbarians that they subsequently became.
We had the ability to basically prop up humanity for a while using the system, but what we saw was the street light eventually went out.
The original knowledge got lost, and the later builders were building them out of ego. They were monuments to the king, if you will, but they were no longer engines that could help feed their people.
Catastrophes around the world damaged, or if you will, decommissioned some of these sites. So some of them went offline, just like a power plant going offline.
I tend to wonder if the few people who knew the secrets to the energy connection with those pyramids didn't die off. If it was a thin chain of, for example, a shaman to his apprentice, and if the wrong people get killed at the right time, that chain is broken, that knowledge gets lost.
As long as we think we are more advanced than we've ever been, we are blind to technology based on subtle energies.
It's not fair also. It's not fair to deny what you can see and touch by your own hand. This is only the technique, and we have that technique still. But nobody wants to listen.
were the ancients so interested in the motion of the stars? Why was cosmology sacred to the ancients? Pondering the history of ancient Egypt, we typically think of the mysteries of the pyramids and the grandeur of the temples. But where did it all start? Do we know how long ago the ancients began tracking the stars? Could there be lost worlds buried beneath the sands? Cosmology is the study of the universe in its totality. We think of cosmology as science, whereas the Egyptians considered it sacred.
There's one thing we know about ancient Egypt for certainty, is that they observed the star Sirius. And we are sure when they speak of that star.
Everything that comes out of the ancient world has to have a spiritual and metaphysical base.
The ancients, and the ancient Egyptians in particular, but probably ancient civilizations more generally, saw themselves, humanity, us, as tied in with the bigger environment, the cosmos, the bigger picture.
They built monuments and they aligned them. But what for, and do their belief systems have validity today?
If we want to decode Egyptian symbolism, we should look for clues in the ancient language that Hakim learned as a child from his elders, living along the Band of Peace. Looking at the many images left by the Egyptians, we have assumed that they were obsessed with death. Turning to the ancient Suf language, however, we learn that they didn't even have a word for death. They called it westing.
We have no word death in our culture. No word death. And to express this operation of death, we say westing. Going towards west, like the sun rises from the east, and westing. So there is no word death here. They believe in resurrection. If the sun sets in the west, the resurrection happens in the next day when the sun rises in the next day. So the deceased believe that it's just like the sun.
The Egyptians obviously had a very different worldview from ours today. They believed in the afterlife and the soul's immortality.
Was it possible at all that they had found some sort of science of immortality, for example, we call it? As crazy as it may seem, they seem to be very, very convinced that they knew how to send the king to his cosmic world. Those stellar gods, of whom the king believed that he himself would become one stellar god after his death, constructed monuments and performed rituals that mimic the events that they saw in the sky. It sounds against all the tenets of our scientific beliefs, but we have to see why they were so convinced. The ancient Egyptians perceived the land as a cosmic environment, that it followed the activities of the sky because they believed them to be running in parallel. And they had reasons to believe that. One of the main reasons was the cycles of the Nile. The Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt, and it performed the cycle, which followed the cycle of the sun and the stars. It's not surprising at all that they associated the reappearance of the stars with the rebirth of the Nile. Essentially, the star religion, if you like, boiled down to one important aspect, that it somehow could help the king become a spiritual being and return to the cosmic world in a specific place with Orion and so forth. How they thought they were going to do it is by looking very, very carefully at what happened to the stars. And the stars perform an annual cycle, but those of Sirius and Orion give us a curious cycle in that they disappear, or they appear to disappear. But if you watch a star over the course of the year, you'll find that there comes a time when it is very low in the west at time of sunset. So the sun sets, and as it gets dark, the star appears just for a few seconds over the west. If you come the next day, you will not see that star. And for 70 days or so, the star has gone. It seems to have gone under the earth. But after those 70 days, it appears by this time at dawn, rising just before the sun, which we call the heliacal rising, whereas the Egyptians call it the rebirth of the star. So in their mind, something happened. In their mind, the star went in the underworld, stayed in the underworld for 70 days, and then by magic popped up again, was reborn again in the east. That's the pyramid text. The pyramid texts mimic this cycle.
At the ancient site of Saqqara, we find the pyramid texts, the oldest known religious texts in the world. Covering the inner walls of these small pyramids are thousands of hieroglyphs showing knowledge of celestial mechanics and cycles of time. Although we've come a long way in our understanding of hieroglyphs, it is possible that many layers of meaning in the symbols remain hidden. Until now. When we approach hieroglyphics, we do so from our own point of view, and we assume that the letters of our alphabet correspond with certain hieroglyphs. There are 4,000 Egyptian hieroglyphs, but only 26 letters. In order to crack the code, we need to open our minds to different levels of meaning.
I think it's just familiarity with the way modern languages work. No one expects that a word would work differently. Our mindset is that a letter is the carrier of a phonetic value and that a word is the carrier of a concept. To understand the Egyptian words, you have to start from the approach that the letter is the carrier of the concept and the word is an extended sentence. There are nuances of meanings to the words that you don't get if you don't understand what the individual glyphs mean. For instance, there's an Egyptian word that is translated as diving duck, but when you read the glyphs, it really reads pool of water, place of diving duck.
In 1822, French scholar Jean-François Champollion and British scientist Thomas Young deciphered the hieroglyphics from the Rosetta Stone. The stone was created in 196 BC. It showed the same text in hieroglyphic, Greek, and Demotic Egyptian on the one tablet. Scholars have used Champollion's translations as the basis for deciphering hieroglyphs. Could Champollion have missed subtleties, or even withheld some information?
One biographical study of Champollion said that he delayed for a very long period of time before producing his translation because, in the words of the study, he clung stubbornly to the idea that an Egyptian glyph might mean something more than just a phonetic value.
Laird Scranton is a computer software engineer who has interpreted a new aspect of hieroglyphics. His research is revolutionizing the way hieroglyphic is understood.
Basically, Egyptian hieroglyphic words work more like an acronym in English, like the phrase FYI, or an acronym such as CIA or CBS, where anyone who reads English understands that you don't try to pronounce this word. This is not a word that you're going to read for its meaning in terms of the letters all put together. It's one letter at a time, stands for one word at a time, and you put the words together to get the meaning.
If we think of each hieroglyphic word as an acronym, rather than having a phonetic value, a new layer of interpretation appears. Hieroglyphs reveal in symbolic terms the way the ancient Egyptians thought the universe works.
I can show that certain key glyph shapes came out of cosmology, which describes how the universe was created. Okay, and because the shapes came out of cosmology, it makes sense that the meanings that attach to the shape are associated with cosmology also. They would have meanings related to the creation of the universe. Once you agree that the sun glyph means what it means, and that's all traditional meanings, it's hard to argue that the word month doesn't say the moon makes an orbit. Or it's hard to argue that the word year doesn't say time of the Earth's orbit around the sun.
The ancient Egyptians were almost obsessive keepers of records. And one thing that they observed most was the celestial objects. So we'd expect them to pay attention and record. Now, how far back? That's a big question. Well, we now have some sites that go at least 6,000 to 7,000 years before. There's a megalithic site that has been found in the early 70s, but not understood until lately, that has astronomical alignments. And strangely, the astronomical alignments that it has are precisely the ones you find in the Pyramid Age. So Orion, Sirius, the summer solstice, they're all there. It's no more theory. We have evidence that they did it.
For decades, author Robert Bauval has been studying the alignment of Egyptian monuments to key stars.
Muhammad, look, we've come here, and what we're trying to do is get to the Nabta line. The most important thing is we get there. Yeah.
He is now planning an expedition across the desert to a site called Nabta Playa, 100 kilometers west of the Nile and 30 kilometers north of the Sudanese border. It is the location of Egypt's oldest astronomical measuring device.
And when we're there, how do you know we're there? It's all desert.
Yes, it's desert. Every place here in Western Desert, I know it.
If you can, we're going to need a GPS.
Yeah.
If you can get one.
Yes, I have one.
That makes me feel a lot happier.
The team finds out that permits from Cairo have been delayed.
Now we wait. You tell us we wait for the answer from Cairo. And so in the meanwhile, let's go and see the sites. Let's go and see some of the temples here. Yeah?
Okay.
Let's do it.
The key to decoding Egypt is in the alignments of the temples, which changed in different epochs to match the majestic drift of the procession of the stars.
We're now here at the Karnak temple in Luxor. On this wall we can see the ritual of the stretching of the cord. On the right hand side is the goddess Seshat. She's represented by a priestess. She's holding a rod and a mallet. And on the other side is the pharaoh. There's a cord looping between them, and what they're doing is that they're aligning the monument to the stars.
We know from inscriptions at the Temple of Karnak that they aligned monuments with the circumpolar stars, principally the Big Dipper.
They also align to the stars of Orion. very similarly to what we also have at Nabka. The Karnak temple, the very center of Egyptian religious activity, is aligned to the sunrise and the winter solstice. So as we look down the axis this way, on the winter solstice the sun will rise along the axis. And in the summer solstice, it will be aligned to the sunset of the sun. So as we have at the Nabta Playa, in this circle of the calendrical circle where there is the summer solstice alignment, here we have another example of this similar alignment 3,000 years later.
On the expedition into the open desert, Robert Boval hopes to see for himself that these alignments exist in the remote region of Nabta Playa. The team prepares by mapping a route they will access via GPS. Jeeps are equipped with supplies for the dangerous journey. The team arrives at the first stop on their journey through history. In the heart of the El Khaga oasis lies a Christian settlement dating back to the 3rd century AD. Original paint graces the ceiling of the chapel, telling the stories of Adam and Eve.
What is important here is that at Nabta we have a settlement that is 6,000 BC at least. And here we have a settlement, a Roman settlement, which is of the 1st, 2nd century. Surely the people here were aware of some sort of origins in the desert. They must have moved around here. They're only 300 kilometers away. And this is the big work that anthropologists have to get into, cultural anthropologists, people who understand how to look for clues within a lost culture. We're looking for a lost culture that could be the origins of our civilization. That's what we're talking about here.
Off in the distance, the Christian settlement can be seen. In the valley below, we can see the old riverbed of the Nile, which has migrated over 60 kilometers to the east. How many thousands of years would it take to wind back the geological time clock to when the Nile flowed here?
The Nile we know there was here. Before we didn't know. Do you realize what this is? Almost surely the ideas of these people, their beliefs, the way they look at the stars, the way they look at the sun, the way they buried people, comes from here to influence the pharaonic civilization. Imagine 2,000 years ago. There was a Roman garrison with centurions walking about, and priests, and Roman ladies, carriages. I mean, it's amazing to think that this was like this. People have been here for thousands of years. I mean, we know that. But now you're going to show us caves, you're going to show us prehistoric caves, where there are drawings that tell us that people were here even longer than we thought. Maybe 10, maybe 15,000 years ago. That's incredible. We're on a 30-40 meter high dune, right in the middle of the path of the road. The old road, as you can see, I mean, it's quite amazing. The old road actually strikes a dune. This is a new dune. It's been formed, well, in the last 30 years or so. It shows you how the sand moves fast.
The team tests the jeeps in the open desert by heading off to an ancient desert monastery. Along the way, the team stumbles across a large outcropping of stone, with obvious layers of stratification. The guide tells the team that the area is an ancient ocean bed. There's water like ripples. and seashells are still embedded in the hard rock, indicating a vast change in geology and climate over the past several thousand years.
It's probably petrified timber, this, on a much later period, but you can see the shells here. The shell is encrusted. They're millions of years old. We're walking on terrain that is millions of years old.
The western desert today is rainless, but in the past it received as much as 500 millimeters of precipitation per year. There were permanent lakes, large springs, and seasonal streams. The most recent wet period was between 130,000 and 70,000 years ago. Then it was thornbrush, savanna. At that time, the area supported many large animals: gazelles, giraffes, buffalo, camels, and antelopes. After that period, it was hyper-arid until 12 or 13,000 BC. Before 12,000 years ago, the summer tropical monsoons reached southern Egypt. Precipitation was limited and fell mostly during the summer months. It was sufficient to support small animals and cattle. The small animals could live off the dew. The climate resulted in highly mobile human populations. There are ancient cave paintings in a remote location that may provide clues to human settlements from the distant past. Is this crucial evidence being protected by Egyptian authorities?
It's terrible. Terrible. It's priceless. Priceless prehistoric evidence. Look here. Look here. What's this, a dog or a gazelle? A man. You see the man here? He's wearing pharaonic clothes. It's terrible. With scribbles all over. I mean, the evidence that we're looking for is being destroyed by irresponsible people who are coming here. The site is unprotected. And the irony is that people who are responsible are prevented from coming here and driven crazy with licenses and papers. Look here. Oh, there's a beautiful Hatorian cow. Look at this. I mean, this is an artist. This is not a primitive carver.
Pre-dynastic Egyptian belief systems originated with cattle cults linked to the Nile. A cow was seen as the mother of the sun. Cattle were deified and were considered earthly representatives of the gods. An enduring ideology with Hathor as the center figure. Images of bulls were shown with depictions of stars, and this dates to before pre-dynastic Egypt. Cattle pastoralists were in the Sahara several thousand years before pre-dynastic Egypt. Gilf Kabir, which means large plateau, is another large ceremonial center a further 600 kilometers west, near the borders of Libya, the Sudan, and Egypt. The Cave of the Swimmers, made famous by the movie The English Patient, is located here. Prehistoric rock art shows people and their cattle. Since Gilf Kabir is 600 kilometers away, it seems as though cattle cults were prevalent throughout North Africa in ancient times. Could this be another clue that the nomadic tribes were connected? Could they have influenced the ancient Egyptians? Arriving at the monastery, we can see it has never been accessible by road. Once occupied by Christians, it lies upon an ancient camel trail 40 days from its closest neighboring site. It still shows evidence of having been an oasis, with a huge acacia tree that is more than 800 years old. The team has a picnic on a carpet of yellow acacia flowers.
This is a wonderful oasis. I mean, I'm really pleased. We tested the cars, everything is working fine. Yeah. You know, the drivers are fine. And it was a good idea to come and rest here. I needed the rest because after all these tents of waiting for the permits, everything is ready, the permits are ready.
Yeah, but you must be to living now, this place, to go to the hotel and stay overnight, and we start tomorrow up early at 3 a.m. morning.
I'm ready.
Yes, I know you're ready, but you don't know, it's a hard way to arrive to Abu Simbel.
Let's do it. Let's do it. We wait a long time. Let's do it. Let's have a good night's sleep.
The team gets an early start, armed with long-awaited permits granted by the Supreme Council of Antiquities and the Egyptian army. They will enter the dangerous region of the Western Desert, to the south of El Khaga Oasis.
Well, after days of waiting and of uncertainty, we're finally on the road. We got the permit and we're ready to go out in the desert to Nabta.
انت المحطة الثانية يا وليد؟ معايا ايه؟ المصاريف ازاي؟
After driving south for hours along an old road covered by occasional sand dunes, there is nervousness in the air. The team will be traveling blind in the open desert for the last part of the journey, relying solely on GPS equipment to locate the ancient site of Nabta Playa.
Yeah, about
but this is very good. This is very tough.
3 kilometers.
Right.
I'm sure.
What clues will be uncovered at Nabta Playa? How have these influences drifted across the African continent? More than 3,000 kilometers further west, in Mali, there is a living culture with a surprisingly similar worldview to that of the ancient Egyptians. The Dogon live in Mali, largely in isolation. Studies of the Dogon culture mirror the ideology of the ancient Egyptians with uncanny precision.
I realized through my Dogon studies that there were relationships between Dogon words and Egyptian words, and I noticed that Dogon drawings turned up as glyphs in those Egyptian words.
Laird Scranton's radical reinterpretation of Egyptian hieroglyphs came directly from his studies of Dogon cosmological symbols. Their priests use cosmological drawings, symbols they have used for thousands of years. While it is impossible to ask the ancient Egyptians to explain their beliefs, Dogon priests can explain their cosmology and how their symbols are written and pronounced.
The Dogon lay things out in such detail that it's like having the teacher's copy of the manual of the book, you're studying, with the answers to the questions written down in the back. You can go to a Dogon priest, or you can go to the anthropological studies that were taken in relation to the Dogon priests, and they flat out tell you what their symbol means and what they're, what they're trying to talk about. The general pattern I could say is that Dogon cosmology tells us how a concept should be expressed, how the word should be pronounced, what multiple levels of meaning the word should be associated with, and what kind of a drawing it should be associated with. That predicts for us what we ought to find in Egypt. And so when I go to Egyptian studies, I look at the Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionary or go to a book about Egyptian cosmology, sure enough, I find the same word expressing the same meanings, written with the same drawing or the same drawn character, and I say I've got a match.
How is it possible that the Dogon culture in present-day Mali is connected to the ancient Egyptians? What is the link?
The Dogon seem to have come out of a class of priests who had very specialized knowledge and who, for one reason or another, were not happy with the way things were going in Egypt and deliberately left. I would say that sounds like it's true. I can't prove it's true, but it doesn't contradict anything I know. The fact that there's a match between the Dogon drawing and the Egyptian glyph in the context of the same word, pronounced the same way, with carrying the same meanings, is just another level of validation that I'm on the right track, that these words really do correspond to each other.
Using this new interpretation of hieroglyphic, what can we learn about the ancient Egyptian view of sacred cosmology?
I had some concerns originally as I began writing some of the books about what right did I have to be revealing secrets that have been kept for 3,000 years. But when I realized that cosmology is about science, it's about the creation of matter and things like that, and I realized how close our science is right now to being caught up with what the cosmology, the ancient cosmology, seemed to know, I realized that if anybody's going to get any benefit out of it at all, that it has to come out now. You can't wait any longer. We're only about 50 years away from discovering all the things that I found in the Dogon and Egyptian cosmology.
Is it possible the ancient Egyptian cosmology was more advanced than today's science?
I'd say there is information in the ancient cosmology that would be a benefit to the string theorists and to the modern cosmologists if they pay attention to it. I think the Dogon and the Egyptians explain to us how it is that a mere act of perception can cause the wave-like behavior of matter to turn into particles, which the scientists don't know. When you ask Stephen Hawking how many fundamental particles there are, he says more than 200. If you ask a Dogon priest, he says 266.
Science is on the verge of understanding things that ancient civilizations seemed to know long ago. How is this possible?
Very, very close. Within a couple of 100 meters.
The excitement builds for the real destination of the expedition, the ancient site of Nabta Playa.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Here we have this bunch of huge megaliths that were dragged from God knows where and placed in a pattern, a sort of center point of the whole area. it's essential that we do not disturb the stones, we don't touch anything, we just look at them. Because the alignments are there and they've been there for thousands of years, undisturbed, and we can use them to date this place.
A group of archaeologists led by Fred Wendorf, called the Combined Prehistoric Expedition, by chance found some pottery shards at Nabta Playa. They thought that the megaliths were just outcrops of rock, and then they started to realize, well, these are setting on top of playa sediments, sediments that were built up during the Neolithic time, and so how did they get there? And so they had to get there from men. These are man-made objects, these megaliths. One of the possible links to Egypt before the pharaohs is that Nabta Playa became climatically hyper-arid like it is today around 3800 BC. It has not been lived at or used since.
It has been assumed by historians that Egypt borrowed its complex society from Mesopotamia. However, it is now generally recognized that a process of social complexity is not diffused from one location to another, but rather develops locally.
(3400 BC is when you see pre-dynastic cultures building up on the Nile Valley, just 100 kilometers east of Nabta Playa. If that's the case, then a lot of the great dynastic Egyptian stuff we're all familiar with had some aspect of origin in the Nabta Playa people's cultural development.
Dr. Nicole Dueck is an Egyptologist who lectures at the British Museum and at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. By strange coincidence, she happened to be at Nabta Playa on the same day as our team.
From what I understand from her, she also believes that this could be the source of Egyptian civilization.
This is just amazing. I've wanted to come here since the first publications came out.
What are the odds of meeting on the same day?
None.
Exactly.
The coincidences for me are astonishing. I mean, last year, the same people, we went to Gilf Kebir and the Wenat. We spent 2 days roaming around Karkotal and looking at the graffiti and, all the bovids and the cattle and the people moving around with their animals. And it's the same dates as here.
These people had what today we would call a calendar. They use the position of the sun to mark the specific days of the year, and the main stations of the year, of course, are the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and the two equinoxes. No doubt, they tracked the sun through the year, and therefore they had a calendar.
This structure may not appear significant above ground. Looking beneath the surface reveals an enigma.
These complex structures are the most enigmatic remaining aspects of Nabta Playa. When they excavated the central one, the largest one, underneath the surface, down in the playa sediments, the playa sediments about 10 feet deep, they found this megalithic sculpture. Some people call it the cow stone. It has perhaps a vague resemblance to a cow, but it also seems maybe to have an astronomical meaning because it's in this astronomical complex. And then underneath the sculpted stone, on the bedrock, underneath all the sediments that were laid down earlier, they found another sculpture, sculpted out of the living bedrock, sort of like the Sphinx is sculpted out of the bedrock.
The bedrock sculpture was carved and sediment filled it in over thousands of years. Then the cow stone was carved and placed there, and then sediment filled it in again. We are looking at 3 subsurface layers of sediment. This is a clue to the extreme age of Nabta Playa.
What makes all this far more exciting is that they also align to stars. And that's a totally different ballgame here, because aligning to stars means that they track the seasons. The climatic conditions were very important to them. There was the beginning of the monsoons, and therefore the stars would be the signal to them that the monsoons had started. They would start migrating here, and they would arrive here when the water, the monsoons, the rainfalls had filled the lakes. It was essential that they get here when the lakes have water. It would have been a fatal mistake had they come here 20 or 30 days before the event. From the central complex radiates 3 series of lines, east, and a series of lines north. Right. According to Wendorf and the checkups by Brophy, we've got alignments to the rising of certain stars here and here.
A double alignment of blocks, 250 meters long, points to the brightest stars in the belt of Orion. The second line points to the rising position of Sirius. Another long line of stones aligns to the brightest star of the Big Dipper, which later Egyptians represented as a cow thigh or leg. The stelae face the circumpolar region of the heavens, which the pyramid text describe as a place where the stars never die.
They've got Orion's belt and Sirius. What's interesting is that they seem to be tracking them, not just a line in two, but they seem to be tracking them over the movement over a long period of time.
So they knew the stars moved, and they knew that the sun moved the same every year on an annual cycle. Maybe the whole ceremonial complex has something to do with the age of Gemini and transition to the age of Taurus.
The constellation of Taurus is represented by a bull. If we are talking about the transition to the age of Taurus, was the symbolism of cows in ancient Egypt connected to the nomadic cattle cults prevalent in the area?
So astronomy is telling us that there's a link. Now we need the anthropologists and the Egyptologists to find that link.
The problem is that most of these disciplines are so entrenched in their own little world that it's very difficult to move people one side or the other. And I mean, I don't know how it is in the United States, but in Britain, everyone is in his own little world, and people who deal with text won't talk to people who deal with sites in the same discipline.
It's becoming more than obvious now.
I think it is.
That there are
connections. Of course there are. And they're very, very important connections, because there are no other answers, for the moment anyway. And this is as good as any.
Yeah.
Better.